Hi, I'm Natalie. My sister once told me I was too sensitive, that I took things personally. But last week, she handed me a cake with broken glass hidden inside, and no one in my family asked why. They asked what I did to deserve it. She smiled for the cameras while I stood in the shadows. They erased my name from the program, cropped me out of the photo reel, and handed my speech to someone else. But here's what they didn't know. I didn't eat that cake. He did. So, why did she do it? And what did she think would happen when the truth finally had witnesses? I hadn't even cut the cake yet, and I already knew something was off. The Belvedere Grand looked exactly like I expected it would. Picture perfect, overly curated, and just a little too polished to feel like a celebration. The kind of place where emotions are posed and filtered, not lived. I walked through the glass doors alone, heels clicking against marble, my name not announced, my presence not noticed. Not that I was expecting a grand welcome, but I did expect something. A nod, maybe. A glance of recognition. But no. Just the front desk clerk handing me a generic envelope that read, "Guest of the Bride." I turned it over. No name. Just Pwun's One. That was my name tonight. As I stepped into the ballroom, the scent of peonies, Isolde's favorite, hit me like perfume that wasn't meant for me. The chandeliers shimmered above, and the floor beneath gleamed like someone had wiped it clean of anyone not meant to be part of this perfect scene, including me. It's funny how being erased doesn't happen all at once. It's in tiny omissions that no one notices but you. A young woman wearing a headset, clipboard in hand, greeted me. "Are you with the bride's party?" "I'm her sister," I said, keeping my voice calm. She blinked, scanned her list. "Ah, table 16, in the back corner, near the service entrance." I walked across the room, weaving past photographers, tall centerpieces, and a sea of pastel dresses that probably cost more than my rent. Table 16 was partially blocked by a pillar, the kind of spot you gave to someone you wanted to include, but didn't want visible. A woman in her 40s, holding a champagne flute, smiled at me. "Are you part of the staff?" I didn't answer. I just sat down and folded my napkin across my lap. This wasn't an accident. It was choreography. I glanced around the room and spotted Isolde, glowing under the spotlight. Of course, there was an actual spotlight. Her dress was champagne silk, custom-tailored, hugging her frame like it was designed for a magazine shoot. She posed beside Alaric, all smiles and perfection. I sipped the sparkling water in front of me. I didn't need champagne. I needed distance. Across the room, my parents hovered near the dessert table. I stood up and approached them, brushing off the invisible film of exclusion clinging to my shoulders. "Hi, Mom, Dad." My mother turned, giving me a quick once-over. "You look comfortable." I let it slide. Did the invite get lost in the mail, or did the printer just forget how to spell my name? She sighed. "It must have been a mix-up. These things happen. Don't make it a big deal." If it had been Isolde's name printed wrong, I'm guessing there would have been a reprint. My father chimed in quickly. "The flowers are beautiful, huh?" Deflection. Classic. I walked back to my table. Alone again, among strangers chatting about marketing clients and brand launches. I wasn't even sure they knew Isolde well. Maybe she needed filler guests. Maybe I was one of them. My eyes wandered back to the spotlight. Isolde was making her rounds, thanking people, posing, laughing. Then she turned and spotted me. She crossed the room, her heels silent, but her presence loud. "Oh, you made it," she said, air-kissing both my cheeks without letting her lips touch skin. Her eyes dropped to my dress. A simple dark blue number. Elegant, safe. "Loved that you wore that dress. It's brave," she said, flashing a smile too white to be real. I held my ground. "It's not about clothes, Isolde. Not tonight." She laughed, eyes gleaming. "You're right, it's about family. Try to blend in, okay?" She walked away before I could respond. the scent of her designer perfume lingering in the air like a challenge. Back at my corner table, the toasts began. Voices rang out, names were listed, stories shared. Laughter echoed from the front, applause erupted, none of it for me. My name wasn't mentioned. My seat was still near the pillar. I raised my glass to myself. No clinking, no cheers. Just the quiet sound of glass against my own lip. I was here, but not really. I set the empty glass down and stood slowly, smoothing my skirt with both hands, like that would somehow flatten the sharpness in my chest. The crowd buzzed with laughter that didn't quite reach my corner of the ballroom. I walked toward the gift table, not out of obligation, but because it was the one thing I had left to give. A box wrapped in deep blue, the kind of blue that reminded me of calm seas, of steadiness. Inside were 3 vintage brass bookmarks I found in a tucked-away bookstore near King Street, one shaped like a feather, another like a key, the last a lighthouse. I'd chosen them for meaning. She'd always accused me of being sentimental. The table was spotless. Gifts were stacked in elegant towers, color-coded bows cascading like floral arrangements. But mine was missing. I scanned each stack again, checked underneath for anything dropped or misplaced. Nothing. I caught the attention of a young woman in a black blazer holding a clipboard. "Excuse me, did a small navy blue box get dropped off here earlier today?" She tilted her head and checked something on her list. "If it didn't have a name tag, it may have been moved. Unlabeled packages are placed in the service room. Some don't make it to the table if they can't be verified." "Could I check?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She nodded and led me through a back corridor. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and sweat. Real sweat, not the kind that gets hidden with high-end deodorant. She opened a supply room door, and there it was. My box. The bow had slipped off. The lid was cracked. It looked like someone had opened it, decided it wasn't important, and abandoned it like a misaddressed letter. You don't have to be screamed at to be insulted. Sometimes silence is sharper. I didn't say, "Thank you." I didn't say anything. I just took the box, placed it gently into my purse, and walked back toward the main hall. Passing the powder room, I paused. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. It was one of those things that just happens when voices carry through old wood panels. "Did you see her dress? That lilac number? Looks like she picked it off the clearance rack at Marshall's." A second voice chimed in. "I thought she was one of the wait staff earlier." Laughter followed. Not mean-spirited laughter, but that sugary, breathy kind that cuts deeper because it pretends to be kind. I stood in the hallway, breathing steady. That dress had been handed to me by Isolde a week ago. She said it matched the color palette. "You want to look appropriate, right?" "Right." She dressed me for ridicule, and I let her. The door creaked as someone exited the powder room, and I stepped aside to avoid eye contact. It didn't matter. I didn't need to be seen in that moment. I needed to see. I walked back into the ballroom. My mother spotted me and waved me over. Not to greet me, not to introduce me to someone, to adjust the floral arrangement next to her. "You always had an eye for balance," she said, shifting a hydrangea out of alignment. "Keep it tight. Don't upstage the Dece. This is her moment." "Of course it is." I smiled. Just a flicker of the lips. No teeth, no warmth. Something inside me shifted, not snapped, just realigned, like a camera lens finding its focus. This wasn't a case of being forgotten. It was a pattern, a strategy disguised as celebration. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't storm out or cause a scene. I adjusted the hydrangea. I smoothed the tablecloth. And then I stepped away, walking slowly toward the bar. Alaric was standing near the bourbon selection, jacket slung over one shoulder, glass half full in his hand. He noticed me before I said anything. "Hey," he said gently, like we were still the friends we once were. "Nice to see you here." I nodded, unsure if my voice would come out flat or furious. I chose careful honesty. I almost wasn't. He looked at me a second longer than necessary. Not pity, not curiosity. Something else. Awareness. "Well, I'm glad you came." I didn't respond. I just held his gaze for a moment, then turned toward the sparkling water dispenser. It wasn't just a missing present. I was the part of her past she was trying to delete. The bartender gave me a slow nod when I asked for sparkling water, like he knew exactly the kind of night I was surviving. I sipped from the stemmed glass, letting the fizz dull my tongue while my eyes found Alaric again. Shoulders relaxed, laughter just barely masking how much effort it probably took him to get through each toast, each posed photo with my sister. For a split second, I saw the version of him that used to walk beside me in college. Same quiet amusement, same watchful pause before speaking. The version of him that once felt like mine, before she took him, wrapped him in sparkle, and called it fate. I didn't even get a warning. He and I had spent half a semester glued together. Study groups turned into long walks back to the dorms. Coffee dates blurred the line into real dates. We never called it anything. We didn't need to. That one night, late December, 2 days before break, I was sure something would finally be said. Instead, I got a text. "Sorry, something came up. Rain check?" That was the last message he sent me. When classes resumed in January, he showed up at a campus party, holding her hand. She had a way of entering rooms like she'd just won something. That night was no different, and maybe she had. He never looked at me again the same way. I never asked why, never confronted either of them. I just buried it, folded the memory like a note passed in middle school, creased at the corners, never thrown away. That was what I had been taught. In our house, the younger sibling kept the peace. The older one kept the spotlight. And peacekeepers don't raise their voices. They bite their tongues. The ballroom had started dimming its chandeliers to prepare for the first dance. I wandered past the reception area, where a projection screen played a looping photo montage. Childhood birthday parties, 4th of July trips, matching Halloween costumes. A rotating carousel of curated nostalgia. Except, I wasn't in a single frame. It wasn't just omission. It was precision. Even the group shots I remembered being part of. They were cropped. I stood there a little longer than I meant to, hoping maybe I had missed something. But the sequence played again, and still, nothing. Not even one picture of the two of us as kids, as if I'd never been part of her story at all. Behind me, a man's voice said softly, "I thought she was an only child." I turned slightly. He wasn't even talking to me, just murmuring to his date. I walked away without reacting, the screen still flickering behind me. The photos were never for us anyway. They were for the story she wanted the world to believe. She didn't delete me from one moment. She deleted the proof that I ever mattered. Outside the hallway leading to the coat room, I found a bench and sat down, letting the walls muffle the sound of the DJ's playlist switching to a soft jazz number. I didn't cry. That part of me had burned out years ago. I reviewed the pattern, not the one-night insults, not the passive comments. The pattern. The way she always found ways to erase me quietly, beneath a smile, behind a compliment, under the guise of aesthetics or logistics. And it worked, because I let it. But not tonight. This wasn't about a dress or a missing gift, or even Alaric. This was about making sure I never existed on her terms. And I finally understood. This wasn't history repeating. This was a deliberate performance. A strategy. I wasn't going to fight her on stage, but I wasn't going to stay in the wings either. I stood up, adjusted my dress, and walked slowly toward the main ballroom again. I wasn't ready to make noise, but I was ready to start listening closely. I eased back into the main ballroom, just as the servers began preparing the dessert station. My heels moved soundlessly on the thick carpet, but my mind buzzed with a clarity that made every clink of glass and flicker of light feel magnified. I didn't speak to anyone, I just watched. For the first time that night, I wasn't participating. I was observing. A young man from catering appeared beside me, holding a sleek, ivory-colored box with gold trim. His smile was bright, rehearsed. "Special delivery for the bride's favorite sister," he said cheerfully. I blinked at the word. Favorite. He handed me the box. A small card tucked underneath the ribbon read, "To Natalie, because sweetness deserves sweetness." My lips curved into something that resembled a thank you, but my hands paused. There was nothing wrong with the box, not on the surface, but something about it buzzed wrong under my skin. I waited until he disappeared, then walked with it toward one of the wall mirrors near the rear exit. The lighting there was dimmer, but angled. I peeled back the lid slowly, careful not to disturb the decorative frosting too much. It was a slice of vanilla rose cake, impeccably plated, smooth as porcelain. But near the base, just above the outer edge, I caught it. A shimmer, a glint. Something that looked like it could have been sugar crystal if I hadn't turned it under the light again. It wasn't sugar. I knew what I was seeing. A shard, slender, clear, almost invisible unless you were looking. I didn't panic. I didn't gasp. I closed the box again, retied the ribbon, and walked it over to the edge of the event staff station. "Hi," I said evenly to a woman managing a checklist. "Do you know if the couple's toast cake is ready?" She nodded, pointing to a covered tray on the side cart. "Yes, identical slices, same recipe. They'll be plated at the top of the hour." Identical. That slice wasn't a mistake. That slice was a message. I tucked the box into my purse, not to eat, not to discard, just to keep. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but instinct said not to let it out of my hands. Back inside the ballroom, I noticed the side lighting above the floral arch had been set too bright, washing out every photo beneath it. I flagged one of the event staffers, trying to be helpful, trying to pretend like I still had a role here. "Hey," I said gently, "you might want to lower the output on that left spotlight. It's creating a glare on every lens pointed that way." The man looked at his clipboard, then at me. "Sorry, only Isolde has authority to approve changes," he said flatly. "We've been told not to make any adjustments unless she says so." I nodded like I understood, then stepped back. Years ago, I helped Isolde build her first brand shoot from scratch. I held reflectors, arranged bouquets, even spent 3 hours taping down cables so her dress wouldn't catch in the footage. Back then, she had no audience, just ambition. And me. Now I couldn't even be trusted with a light switch. It's strange when you're no longer overlooked. You're actively excluded. That's a different kind of silence. One that isn't accidental. One that's authored. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just walked. Past the buffet, past the string quartet, past a group of guests laughing at something I would never be invited to hear. And I watched her. Isolde, my sister, my rival, my eraser. She stood near the head table, smiling with perfect ease, one hand resting lightly on Alaric's forearm, the other gesturing to a group of donors I recognized from her firm's last gala. She laughed at just the right decibel, nodded at just the right rhythm. A maid of honor whispered in her ear, and without missing a beat, she pointed to a misplaced orchid 2 feet away. The maid adjusted it instantly. Every movement was planned. Every smile calculated. She wasn't celebrating, she was producing, and I realized, maybe she always had been. You start to wonder how many performances you've clapped for without realizing they were staged, and how many stages you were never meant to stand on. There was something inside that cake, and this time I wouldn't swallow it just to keep the peace. I stepped away from the center of the room and made my way to the long hallway where the wall-to-ceiling mirrors were mounted. It was the quietest place in the venue. No music, no laughter, just the soft hum of the central air. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the box. Carefully, I untied the ribbon, opened the lid halfway, and tilted the slice of cake under the light. One turn, then another. That's when I saw it. Not just a shimmer, 3 of them. Thin slivers embedded along the base of the frosting, as transparent as glass, but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. I didn't react. I just stared. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a mistake. She wanted it to be poetic. A slice for the sweet sister, with just enough pain to be forgettable by morning. I closed the box and placed it back into my purse, wrapping it tight in a napkin before zipping the clutch. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. This wasn't shock, this was confirmation. On the way back toward the lounge, I passed a small group of guests arriving late. One of them, a woman in a sequined jumpsuit, glanced at me and waved her hand casually. "Hey, do you mind grabbing a bottle of champagne for table 7? She asked. I blinked, caught off guard. "I'm not staff," she laughed. "Oh, sorry, I just thought, never mind. You just look like you work back of house." She turned back to her group, unbothered. Of course I did. My seat was near the kitchen entrance. My dress, selected by Isolde herself, was subdued, the kind of outfit you could fade into a wall in. I'd been placed there by design. When someone works that hard to make you small, it's because they're scared of how big you could get. I moved through the crowd slowly, retracing my steps, observing more than engaging. Every glance, every shift of body language told me exactly where I stood in the pecking order. I wasn't the forgotten sister. I was the one being erased, intentionally. I found the event coordinator near the reception table, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me," I said, tone friendly. "Do you know where the couple's toast cake is being held?" She hesitated. "Why?" "I just want to make sure it's refrigerated. This heat's brutal." She glanced at her notes, then motioned toward the back hallway. "It's pre-plated, covered in the kitchen prep area. Left side, second shelf." "Thanks," I said. I didn't head there immediately. I just needed the information, needed to know how far this had been orchestrated. I started to piece together the timeline, the rotations of the staff, when the cake would be served, who would deliver it. I didn't have a full plan yet, but I had a location. I had motive. I had proof in my purse. It wasn't time to act, but it was time to prepare. As I passed near the stage, I saw Isolde again, standing near the archway of roses, laughing into the flash of a camera, hand resting gently on Alaric's shoulder. She caught my eye, and for the first time, she walked toward me. She stopped 2 feet away, her smile still fixed but slightly thinner. "Everything okay?" she asked. I mirrored her smile. "Perfect, just enjoying the details." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "That's what they're for." "Of course," I said. "You've thought of everything." She nodded, stepping back into the spotlight. She still thought I was the sister who stayed quiet, who clapped politely, who didn't ask questions. She didn't know I'd stopped swallowing glass a long time ago. As Isolde turned away, slipping back into her curated spotlight, I stayed where I was. Not frozen, focused. Her performance was seamless. Mine would be quiet. I wandered past the edge of the reception area, down the hallway where the technical team had set up a temporary station to manage the slideshow and camera feeds. I wasn't planning to linger, but then I saw it. A monitor, still powered on, looping through raw footage from earlier that day. No one was watching it. The operator had clearly stepped away for a break. I leaned closer, scanning the scenes, guests arriving, flower setups, staff moving trays. And then I saw it. There, on screen, was a wide-angle shot from earlier that afternoon. Isolde, standing beside a catering staffer, handing him the same ivory cake box now resting in my purse. I couldn't hear the audio, but her lips moved closely to his ear before he walked off. The next frame, him handing it to me. A camera doesn't capture motive, but it doesn't have to. It captures truth. And this one had done its job. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera quietly, and took a screenshot of the monitor. Then another. Just enough to freeze the evidence. Just enough to prove this wasn't paranoia. It was premeditation. I emailed the files to myself with a single subject line. In case I need it. I stepped back, heart steady. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was clarity. As I exited the side hallway, I passed by the lounge area designated for bridal prep. It was nearly empty now, just a few scattered bags, half-empty champagne flutes, and the lingering scent of hairspray. I recognized Isolde's custom clutch immediately, sitting on the arm of a velvet chair. The screen was still lit, unlocked. I hesitated, but curiosity doesn't wait for permission. I didn't open apps or scroll. I didn't need to. The screen already displayed a note, a list, titled in all caps, Control, Natalie's Triggers. Beneath it, Play Sweet. Give her old dress. Offer cake mid-program. Keep family distant. Defer praise. My throat dried, but I didn't look away. At the bottom of the list was an audio file labeled, If She Talks. I didn't open it. I didn't press play. Instead, I airdropped the file to my phone silently and backed away without leaving a trace. She had built a playbook, but forgot I might read it. I walked back toward the media station, locking my phone and tucking it deep into my purse. Every piece of what I had gathered, screenshots, audio, her handwritten sabotage, was now filed in a folder labeled The Archive. I didn't know if I would ever show it to anyone, but I knew what it meant. She'd prepared for everything, except being recorded by her own tactics. Near the tech table, a guy in his 20s, wearing a simple black polo and adjusting a light tripod, caught my eye. I recognized him from earlier, probably the second shooter, assisting the main event photographer. "You're the only one not trying to be seen tonight," he said with a slight smile. "Isn't that ironic?" I replied. He nodded toward the screen I'd just left. "Don't worry, the cameras saw what mattered." I gave him a long look, measuring him not as an ally, but as a witness, maybe even a safeguard. I wasn't sure yet, but his words sat right. Back at my table, I didn't sit. I didn't toast. I didn't speak. Instead, I stood behind the room's performances, holding more truth than anyone realized. Her speeches were scripted. Her smiles were rehearsed. But the damage? That was always live. It was late enough that the first rounds of wine had begun loosening everyone's edges, but early enough that the real unraveling hadn't started yet. The playlist shifted from classical strings to something with a beat, and I used the noise to move through the crowd without being stopped. At the back corner, beside the stage entrance, I spotted the printout taped to the wall. The final program run of show. My name was listed under Family Remarks for the evening slot, but someone had drawn a thick red line through it, in pen. Not strike through, not edited, canceled. Below it, handwritten in block letters. Sloane. Sloane, Isolde's ever-present PR shadow. The one who laughed a second too hard at her jokes and handed her fresh lip gloss without being asked. Of course. I approached the event coordinator, someone I vaguely remembered from a previous corporate event. Her name tag read Mara. "Hi, Mara," I said quietly, like we were two co-workers catching up. She blinked in surprise. "Oh, hi, Natalie. Beautiful event, right?" I smiled faintly. "I just noticed my slot for the family toast is missing." Her eyes flickered to the wall. "Yes. We were told by the bride this morning that there'd be a change. She mentioned something about keeping things concise for time. Emotional concerns, I think she said." "Right," I said, nodding slowly. "Thanks for letting me know." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just turned and walked back into the crowd, head high, spine straight. But I didn't sit. Minutes later, the microphone crackled, and Sloane walked up to the stage holding a silver note card in one hand, a glass of bubbly in the other. She smiled sweetly. "I'm honored to share a few words about the beautiful couple." The words that followed weren't hers. I knew them, line for line. The joke about Isolde getting kicked out of ballet because she was too directive. The story about Alaric accidentally shrinking her sweater in college. The line about how some people shine in rooms. They make the rest of us warmer by standing near them. I wrote that last one during a late-night edit 3 weeks ago. She even used the same rhythm I practiced out loud. And the room clapped. My parents beamed. Alaric chuckled like it was the first time he'd heard the story. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I recorded it. Back at my table, I pulled up my Google Drive. The folder I'd created, as sold wedding drafts, showed a new access log from 2 days ago. Opened, downloaded, shared. Sloane's email was listed as the user who had downloaded it. The file she delivered wasn't even renamed. Just cleaned up, line-spaced, reformatted, and printed. They didn't just take my seat. They printed my name in invisible ink and handed it to someone louder. After the speech, Isolde made her way toward me, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. She held one out, like a peace offering. "Wasn't Sloane great?" she asked, eyes dancing. "She really captured you," I said, voice even. Isolde's grin widened. "We're all a reflection of who we serve, aren't we?" I stared at her for a beat. Some reflections lie, others record. Her expression tightened just enough to catch. "You're not upset, are you?" "Wouldn't dream of ruining your moment," I said softly, taking the glass and setting it down, untouched. She walked away with her mask still intact, but I saw it slip for just a second as she turned. Inside, I didn't feel broken. I felt timed. They wanted a performance. I was about to give them a scene they'd never forget. The announcement for dessert echoed across the ballroom, just as I slipped back toward the edge of the crowd. Servers rolled in trays of plated cake slices, and a soft hush settled over the room. It was the ceremonial moment, the sweet punctuation of the evening before the dancing resumed. Isolde and Alaric made their way to the center, all smiles, hands linked like every magazine cover she'd ever studied. The cameras turned. She picked up the gold-plated knife, and together they made the first cut. The guests applauded, phones up, champagne glasses lifted in tandem. A few moments later, they were handed their slices, white rose cake, delicate sugar frosting, almost too perfect to eat. Alaric lifted his fork with a grin, bit down, then froze. I saw it before anyone else did. The slight wince, the twitch in his cheek. He dropped the fork. There was a moment, just 1 second, where everything went still. Then came the cough. He doubled forward slightly, hand to his mouth. A speck of red appeared between his fingers. Then more. Gasps rippled across the ballroom, chairs scraped, music cut off mid-beat. A server shouted for medical assistance. I didn't move. I didn't rush forward or melt into the chaos. I stood where I was, hand resting lightly on my clutch. I didn't need to say anything. The cake spoke for itself. People circled him, unsure what to do. Some guests backed away, visibly shaken. A woman whispered, "Was that glass?" Another replied, "Is someone trying to hurt him?" EMTs who had been on standby rushed in. Isolde stood frozen, face pale, but only for a second. Then, as if flipping a switch, she stepped into the role of panicked fiancé. "Oh my God, Alaric, what happened? Are you okay?" Too much, too polished. I took 2 slow steps closer, just to hear, just to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Isolde cried out again, louder this time, drawing attention, but her eyes kept scanning the room, searching for me. I didn't flinch. I didn't gloat. I simply watched the image crumble in real time. Within minutes, Alaric was escorted to a private suite, EMTs flanking both sides. I knew where he'd be. I waited, then followed. The bridal suite was less polished than the ballroom, scattered makeup kits, spare shoes, 2 purses tossed open on the vanity. Isolde was there, hovering near the couch, wringing her hands until she saw me walk in. Her mask cracked. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. I held out the box. The cake, untouched, still sealed with the card. "To return something that was never meant for me." She lunged forward to snatch it, then stopped herself, remembering there were people watching. "You have no idea what you've done," she spat. "No," I replied. "You're right. I thought I was your sister. But clearly, I was just the insurance policy. And tonight, I lapsed." She stepped closer, voice shaking now. "You think this will make people like you?" "No, but they'll see you." And then, she broke. "She deserved it!" she shouted, her voice shrill, echoing off the walls. "She's always gotten everything without even trying." Silence. Absolute silence. EMTs. A bridal assistant. Alaric, sitting upright on the sofa, gauze at the corner of his lip. Every one of them had heard it. Her hands flew to her mouth, but it was too late. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out, leaving the box behind, exactly where it belonged. Whispers began the moment I stepped into the hallway. From staff, from guests, from people who'd pretended I was wallpaper just an hour earlier. The tide had shifted. Some looked at me with shock, others with quiet nods of respect. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. I just walked. She spent her whole life crafting an image. I spent mine staying quiet. But tonight, silence had a cost. And it was hers to pay. By the time I re-entered the ballroom, the music had stopped. No one was dancing. No one was talking. The lights hadn't dimmed, but the air felt heavier, as if everyone knew something had shifted, but wasn't sure how to name it. Alaric stood near the center of the room, upright but pale, a bandage pressed gently against the corner of his lip. His jacket had been removed. His shirt was still tucked, but slightly wrinkled now, like the chaos had pressed into the fabric. He walked slowly to the microphone. No one announced him. No one needed to. The MC stepped aside with a nod and a nervous half-smile. Alaric took the mic with a calm I hadn't seen on him all night. Not the calm of a groom, the calm of someone ready to leave. "This isn't how I imagined today ending," he began, voice clear but subdued. "But maybe this is how truth begins." The room held its breath. He looked directly at Isolde. "You knew I hated performance, but this whole thing, it wasn't a celebration. It was a production, a show, a controlled narrative." Then, slowly, with care, he reached into his pocket, pulled out the ring, and walked it over to the gift table. He set it down. No speech, no drama, just finality. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few women clutched their chests. One of Isolde's colleagues quietly backed toward the exit. "You knew who I was," he continued, "and still chose to sell the opposite version. I won't be part of this anymore." He didn't wait for applause. He didn't need it. I stood off to the side, watching it all unfold. Not smug, not surprised, just settled. People didn't know where to look. Some stared at the floor, others peeked at me, then quickly looked away. But a few held their gaze, quiet acknowledgement in their eyes. "She really tried to kill him," I heard someone mutter. "Is she going to jail?" whispered a vendor behind me. No one answered, but the tension answered for them. I slipped through a side door and stepped out into the cool night. The air bit at my arms, but it felt cleaner than inside. Realer. A moment later, I heard the door open behind me. Footsteps, my father's. He walked up beside me, hands deep in his pockets, eyes fixed ahead. "You could have told us sooner," he said. "Would you have believed me?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. "She was your pride," I added. There was a long pause. "And you were the one I didn't understand." I nodded. "Now you do." He placed his hand on my shoulder. Not out of affection, but as a kind of resignation. No hug, no apology. Just a gesture, late but not meaningless. We stood in silence for another minute before I turned back inside to collect my things. The ballroom hadn't recovered. People stood in clusters, whispering in tight circles. Isolde was in the far corner, surrounded by her inner circle, most of whom were now avoiding eye contact. Her eyes found mine as I walked by. She didn't speak, neither did I. There was no fire left to burn. She wasn't my villain anymore, just a sad woman clinging to a crown no longer real. I walked past her, picked up my purse, and headed toward the exit. My heels clicked against the marble like punctuation. They asked me to forgive. But first, I wanted them to remember. By morning, my phone was vibrating off the nightstand. Missed calls, texts, screenshots. One headline in particular sat bold across a news site. Fairy tale engagement ends in scandal. I didn't feel surprised, just tired. I scrolled in silence, the screen lighting my apartment's dim gray walls as if it, too, was trying to process the truth. One video had already gone viral. Shot from the side of the reception hall, grainy but clear enough, it showed Isolde handing the ivory cake box to a waiter. Her lips moved close to his ear. "Make sure she gets this privately." The video paused, zoomed, and now the world could see what I had known. Nothing Isolde did was random. I didn't post the clip. I didn't even know who had. But I sent one text to the assistant I'd spoken to near the tech booth. "Thank you for recording what I couldn't prove with words. No emojis, no signature, just truth. People say healing starts when you're heard, but the real shift comes when you're finally believed." Later that week, I met Alaric's legal team at a quiet office downtown. The meeting wasn't long, just formal. Turns out, an old LLC we'd formed in college, back when the two of us had daydreamed about starting a creative studio, had never been dissolved. On paper, I was still listed as a silent partner. Isolde had tried to overwrite my name with her own in more recent filings, but original records didn't lie. When I handed them a printed copy from the state's registration site, Alaric looked at me across the table and said, "She tried to scrub you out of everything, but business doesn't lie like people do." I could have pressed for rights. I could have claimed my share, taken control of assets, made her pay in dollars instead of dignity. But I didn't. I used the documents to formally sever the last financial thread connecting us. No ownership, no lawsuits, just closure. The next morning, sponsors began pulling out from Isolde's PR firm. A memo leaked, her board distancing themselves, pending internal review. A former assistant posted anonymously on a forum, confirming years of emotional manipulation, threats, silence pacts. People began messaging me, some I hadn't heard from in years. "I always wondered how you stayed so quiet. We see you now. I'm sorry it took this long." I didn't reply. Not because I was bitter, but because there was nothing to add. Her empire had been built on silence, and most of that silence was mine. That night, I opened the folder on my phone labeled The Archive, watched the videos again, read the notes I had taken, reviewed the timestamps, the metadata. All of it added up to a kind of truth that didn't need amplification anymore. It just needed to exist. I posted one image on my private account, a scan of my speech, the one I never got to give. No caption, no comments turned on, just a story that never made it to the microphone. But now it had an audience. They asked if I'd meet with her, to talk, to maybe forgive. I said I'd think about it, but I already knew. The request came by phone, not text. That alone told me how serious it was. "Your father's worried," my mother said, her voice stretched thin like aging thread. "Can we meet? Just us, no drama." I agreed, not because I owed her anything, but because sometimes silence gives permission for people to rewrite the story. I wanted no such permission. We met at a quiet cafe off King Street. She was already seated, hands clasped together, a cup of chamomile untouched in front of her. She looked tired, not from sleeplessness, but from years of denial finally turning heavy. "I'm not going to beg," she started, eyes not quite meeting mine. I waited. "But Isolde isn't sleeping. Your father, he's barely speaking. Natalie, you've made your point, haven't you?" I stirred my coffee slowly. "You're asking me to bury it. I'm asking you to keep what's left of this family from falling apart." I leaned back in my chair. "It already did. You just weren't watching." She didn't argue. She looked at her tea, then said quietly, "She doesn't know how to come back from this." "She never planned to come back from anything," I replied, "only to climb higher." She flinched at that. I left without finishing my drink. 2 days later, a courier envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address, no note except a handwritten line in the corner. "Please open." Inside was a velvet jewelry box. I recognized it before I even lifted the lid. The necklace I had given Isolde for her 23rd birthday, back when I still believed a gesture could bridge the gap. A small gold locket, etched with a date only the two of us remembered. Folded inside the box was a note, torn from one of her branded notepads. It was always yours. I just didn't know how to say thank you. I closed the box and didn't open it again. Some gifts, when returned, don't heal. They confirm who they were never meant for. A week passed. Then another. Until finally, I received a formal invite. One last attempt, my father said, to bring us together before it's too late. The dinner was at their house. The same house where Isolde used to dominate every holiday, every graduation speech, every room. I arrived last, deliberately. She was there. No makeup, no designer gown, just a neutral sweater, her hair pulled back like she was trying to look human. My father cleared his throat as we sat. I know this won't fix anything, but I wanted us to try. Isolde looked down at her plate. I wasn't well, she said softly. I was afraid of being replaced. I cut into my salad with slow precision. You didn't hurt me because you were afraid. You hurt me because you could. Her lip trembled. I didn't wait for the tears. I didn't come here to fix this, I said, laying my napkin on the table. I came to close it. I stood. My father reached for my arm but didn't pull. He knew better. Outside, under the porch light, he followed. She'll always be your sister, he said quietly. She'll always be your daughter, I replied. He exhaled. So will you. But his voice wavered, as if even he didn't quite believe it. And I realized I didn't need him to. I didn't need them to choose. I just needed them to stop expecting me to lose. She thought silence was safety. I thought truth was peace. Only one of us was right. I never opened the invitation. I didn't need to. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. Cream cardstock embossed with a therapist's name I vaguely recognized. Inside, I assumed, was a request. A final scene from a sister who wanted a new ending. One hosted in a circle, with tissues in the center and pre-printed talking prompts. I didn't attend. I didn't need her to hear me anymore. I needed to hear myself. So I wrote a letter, not to her, not to anyone, really, just for me. It started simply, "You're done waiting." Then I burned it, lit the corner with a match, and let the words curl into ash over the kitchen sink. There was something deeply final about it, watching language dissolve into smoke. Words that had never reached her didn't need to linger with me. The next morning, I unpacked the last of my boxes. A small studio apartment in a Charleston neighborhood no one in my family ever bothered to visit. The walls were white, clean. The floors creaked slightly when I walked barefoot to the window. My easel was set up near the light. A canvas waited, blank and patient. I hadn't painted in months, years really, not since I stopped believing I was allowed to create something that was mine, and only mine. That morning, I picked up the brush. Later that afternoon, I got a text from Alaric. Proud of you, and grateful you acted when I didn't. I didn't respond. Some connections don't need reopening. Some stories don't need sequels. Still, I smiled. I spent the rest of the week quietly. No media, no interviews, no phone calls from people who once called me dramatic behind closed doors and brave in public comments. I posted one thing, just one. A photo of my original speech, creased from where it had been folded too long, ink faded but still legible. Captioned simply, I didn't get to read this, but I lived it. The comments poured in, strangers who recognized their own silence in mine. Mothers, daughters, coworkers, all saying some version of the same thing. Thank you for choosing honesty over harmony. Sometimes closure doesn't come from being heard. It comes from refusing to whisper anymore. A week later, I passed the Belvedere Grand on my walk home from the art supply store. It looked the same. Gleaming, ornate. The chandelier still visible from the sidewalk. I stopped and looked up at it. I remembered standing under it just weeks ago, in a dress picked for mockery, with my name absent from every printed list. And now? Now I didn't need to be listed. I had written my own place. I was never invisible. I was just too quiet for the wrong room. So I walked past the building, head high, purse light, soul lighter. She wrote her ending in glitter and lies. I wrote mine in truth, and didn't need applause.